Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you enjoyed lunch. It was quite nice having some macaroni and cheese, wasn't it? I just want to make sure that you're all in the correct session. Excuse me. This is Interoception, the 8th sense. Our speaker this afternoon is Melissa Evans. Melissa has moved from tertiary hospital physiotherapy practice to community-based disability practice over 15 years ago, being a passion, journey, and immersion into the deafblind community in Western Australia. Melissa was previously working with Sense Wales? WA?
WA, Western Australia.
Western Australia. So I'm still learning all the acronyms. But now has her own regionally based business, Communications Southwest. Southwest Australia. She is the current treasurer of Deafblind West Australians Inc., a registered charity that provides support, networking, skill enhancement, social opportunities, and advocacy in the broader community. As a deafblind consultant, Melissa strongly feels that we should be in partnership with the individual during clinical sessions, and that understanding the sensory processing of each individual will aid these interactions and outcomes. I introduce to you, Melissa.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending this workshop. My name is Melissa Evans, and I'm a deafblind consultant and physiotherapist from WA. I'm a woman in her 50s with silvering hair. I'm wearing a pale blue long-sleeve shirt, black trousers, and black shoes. I've worked together with individuals living with deafblindness throughout the lifespan with both congenital and acquired groups. I strongly believe that the support around an individual needs to be multidisciplinary, and we need to continually review clinical practices globally to ensure that any intervention forms a strong basis for sensory processing and integration. For the presentation topics today, we'll look briefly at our senses, review the history of interoception, what is interoception, the neurological centres of interoception, the insular and the limbic system, clinical significance, intervention, final thoughts and questions. To participate fully in the deafblind-led experience of clinical intervention, we must learn to understand and believe the individual as they see, feel and live it, and not how we interpret it. Interoception is just another piece in the puzzle when supporting an individual to understand their sensory inputs and their regulation. The research has given internal sensation a name. However, clinically and educationally, you may already be witnessing this process and acknowledging this in your settings. Where does interoception sit within the sensory systems? On the screen is a black image slide with one large orange rectangle in the middle, 5 small blue ovals surrounding it on the right, 2 medium blue ovals on the bottom left, and 1 large green oval on the top left. There is alt text for each shape representing the 8 senses. On the right, we have our 5 basic external sensory systems: visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, and tactile. Then we have 3 hidden or internal sensory systems on the left. At the base, we have the widely recognised vestibular and proprioceptive systems. And at the top, interoception. Johann Christian Ryle discovered the existence of the insular cortical lobe in 1809. This is why in research you may see the labelling of the insula as the island of Ryle. Initial acknowledgement of the term interoception was in the early 1900s by physician Dr. Charles Sherrington to refer to the feelings we get from our internal organs. In the 1990s, as there was progression into more complex radiological and neurological examinations, Antonio Damasio discovered that the insula also plays an important role in the processing of bodily sensations. It wasn't until 2002 that A.D. Budd Craig extended the interoceptive sense to include the entire condition of the inner body, using neural stimulation and functional MRIs to clearly demonstrate the afferent and efferent pathways involved. Within the field of autism clinical practice, this sense has been well recognised. Many great clinical authors have produced resources and intervention strategies, especially the OTs Kelly Mailer and Kara Kozinski. What is interoception? The first definition is from an article titled Functions of Interoception, which was published in Trends in Neuroscience in 2021. Interoception is defined as a process of how the nervous system senses, interprets and integrates signals originating from within the body. The second one is from an article titled Interoceptive Awareness Skills for Emotion Regulation and was published in 2018, but takes this quote from previous writings dating back to 1996. Interoception is the perception of sensations inside the body and includes the perception of physical sensations related to internal organ functions such as heartbeat, respiration, satiety, as well as autonomic nervous system activity related to emotions. Interoception is about reading body signals. Can the individual read signals from their body telling them how it's going and what it needs? Interoception relates strongly to emotional regulation. We can feel our emotions in our body. Emotions that are physically stored in our body produce energy and movement. For example, in a neurotypical sense, a phrase like having butterflies in your stomach is describing a physical sensation, butterflies. We then name the emotional state. I'm nervous, or I'm anxious, or I'm excited. So what are the sensory components that are included in interoception? The image on the screen is a diagram of a human body with a brain and organs outlined internally. There are multiple text points pointing to body sections indicating interoceptive sites, which we'll run through. Moving clockwise from 1 o'clock to 11 o'clock around the body, we have the interoceptive senses of anger, embarrassment, happiness, excitement, fear, thirst, heart rate, breathing rate, physical exertion, nausea, sexual arousal, pain, muscle tension, itch, need for the toilet, social touch, hunger, fullness, tickle, and then finally the insula, which is the interoceptive centre of the brain. There are receptors inside our organs, including our skin, similar to the proprioceptive receptors in our muscles and joints. These specialised cells are responsible for collecting important sensory information. The receptors then send the information via the limbic system to the insular cortex, or the insula for short. It's especially important in the regulation of our vital functions like body temperature, hunger, thirst, digestion and heart rate. That is, our current body state. The insula provides emotional cognition to physiological experiences. Individuals who struggle with interoceptive sense may not understand their emotional feelings. Amanda Moran, who's an education and neurodiversity consultant, says that without being able to feel and interpret those body sensations, it's much harder to clearly identify the emotion attached to it. For instance, to feel fear, an individual must recognise that their muscles are tense, their breathing is shallow, and their heart is racing. This is further complicated with individuals with sensory processing issues, where the brain may have trouble making sense of the information coming in. For example, an itch may feel like pain, or a pain may feel like an itch. These complexities can be confusing to both the individual and their clinician and teacher. Emma Leach, an outreach teacher from Fremantle's in the UK, talks about individuals finding interoceptive input irritating. If they are generally hypersensitive to sensory input, they may overreact to interoceptive sensations. They over-respond. For instance, they may eat more than others to avoid the feeling of hunger pains. They also may use the toilet more often than necessary because they don't like the feel of the bladder when it's full. Our deafblind community has acknowledged the presence of internal sensations for a long time. Please see this quote from our own Mr. David Brown back in 2005 in relation to charge syndrome. Children with charge syndrome are truly multisensorily impaired, having difficulties not only with vision and hearing, but also with the senses that perceive balance, touch, temperature, pain, pressure and smell, as well as problems with breathing and swallowing, eating and drinking, digestion and temperature control. These difficulties or internal sensations described by David in the quote are included in the definitions of interoception. I'll provide a brief outline of the neuroanatomy involved in interoception. The insula is part of the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex, also called grey matter, is the brain's outermost layer of nerve cell tissue. Its appearance has many grooves, which we call sulci, and folds, gyri, to increase the surface area, thus allowing large amounts of information to be processed by more nerve cells. It plays a key role in memory, thinking, learning, judgment, planning, reasoning, emotions, and functions related to senses. In the first image of a brain, the external lobes are viewed unilaterally or from the side. A section from the frontal and parietal lobes and above the temporal lobe has been pulled back, showing a deep lobe, highlighted in green, which is the insula. The second image gives an alternative view of the insula bilaterally. This is a brown and beige drawing of the brain cut through horizontally from the front of the brain, which is at the top of the image, to the back of the brain, which is at the bottom of the image. The insular lobes are indicated by dark brown shading on either outer side of the brain, just above the midway point of the drawing. To clarify the difference between the insula and the limbic system, we can define each by its role. The insula is part of the cerebral cortex, the thinking brain. It is constantly mapping our body state to maintain homeostasis. Its job is to act on the senses being experienced. The limbic system is a set of complex structures that lie on both sides of the thalamus, just under the cerebral cortex. This is the area in which messages are clearly relayed. It acts as a coordinator of the information between the cortex and the limbic areas. I'd like to show you two quick videos about the limbic system, as it's often talked about within the deafblind field. These videos are components of the excellent Open Hands, Open Access deafblind intervenor learning modules produced by the National Centre on Deafblindness in the US. The first video features Kimberly Loga, titled Brain Overview. In the video, Kimberly is visible from the waist up, standing in front of a white background. She has short, wavy brown hair and is wearing a brown jacket and jumper. Kimberly is holding a colourful model of a brain that has been cut through the middle from front to back. The first video describes the importance of the thalamus. Most academics, but not all, accept the thalamus as part of the limbic system.
So as information comes in through the reticular activating system, it's filtering out some information, because if we received all of the information that was available through our senses, we would be overwhelmed. And if the reticular activating system is overwhelmed, we are overwhelmed as well. The information then is going to go up to an area of the brain called the thalamus. The thalamus is often thought as the gatekeeper. It's deciding what information needs to have most attention from the cortices. Now, of course, the brain is concerned about survival, so it's having to make decisions about this information. And is it a threat to my well-being, to my comfort, my safety, and my survival? Information from 11 of the 12 cranial nerves comes into the thalamus. The thalamus needs to look at that information. Is it familiar? Is it unfamiliar? Does it fit with prior information, prior learning? Information that is not considered a threat and doesn't have to do with basic survival needs and does make some sense is going to be sent up to the thinking brains, and then the brain's going to be able to use it for that cognition, for that rational thought, decision-making, planning, reasoning. But if the information coming in is distorted and incomplete, as often happens in deafblindness, or there's a mismatch in information, or for whatever reason the brain's not able to process that I've received that information before and to know that it's not a threat to me, the information is going to be sent down to an area of the brain called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is then going to send information down to the pituitary gland, the master gland. And that's going to trigger our stress response, our fight, flight, fright response. Now the hypothalamus has a clue, because when the hypothalamus is triggered, that's where we're going to see those subtle changes in the child's body responses to indicate that stress is happening. We may see changes in their breathing, they may have changes in their color, we may even see their ears turn red. Lots of different clues that you'll notice as an intervener that indicate subtle changes are happening, that this is too much information, too fast, for the brain to be able to take it into the thalamus and send it up to the thinking lobes. And it's going down instead to the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and triggering that stress response.
Okay, we're just going to have a second, even shorter video that features Kimberly again and further describes the limbic system.
When we talk about the thalamus, for our purposes, we're going to think of the thalamus as part of the limbic system. Some researchers see it as separate, some include it. Other areas of the limbic system are the amygdala and the hippocampus. The thing that's important to remember about the limbic system in general is the limbic system is about memory and about emotions and about fear. And the limbic system likes familiarity. It likes to be comfortable. It likes those things that it can predict to know that it's safe and secure in the world. When you develop relationship with your student with deafblindness as an intervener, as you develop resonance as discussed in other modules, you're working right here in the limbic system. So the brain knows that I'm safe and I'm secure, and the information coming in is okay to go up to the thinking brains, and I'm available for learning. As compared to when that relationship is not there, and I don't know that I'm safe and secure in the world, more information coming in is now having to be filtered and sent down to the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and triggering that stress response.
Thank you. So we notice that there are these two systems. Within the field of interoception, they talk very strongly about the insular cortex as being the main organ of function. But as you can see there, the insula would not function unless the limbic system was doing its job. Interoception is key for several important skills. Firstly, emotions. Every emotion we have evokes a certain feeling in our bodies. We need solid interoceptive awareness to understand how we are feeling in a certain situation and act on it. If you're about to enter a situation that you know may be challenging, for example, presenting at a conference, your stomach may flutter, your heart may beat quickly, you may start to sweat and your muscles may tense up. These sensations indicate that you're feeling nervous. And so you may take some time out on your own to prepare, or you may have a drink of water to settle the nervousness. Another example is when the insula recognises pain and relates it to an unpleasant feeling. The resultant conscious effort is to move away from pain. It is because of the insula that you know how to react when your body is experiencing different emotions. Secondly, as Kelly Mailer describes in her 2017 book, that interoception also impacts skills such as decision-making, intuition, social awareness, empathy, perspective-taking, flexibility of thought, self-awareness, and problem-solving. For individuals who have difficulty with the system, we can describe them in terms of under-responsive and over-responsive. If an individual under-responds, Kelly Mailer explains that they may not feel their internal sensations as readily unless they're very intense. For example, if an individual can't feel their bladder being stretched until it's completely full, then they may wait until the very last minute to go to the toilet. Very worryingly is the individual who may have a significant health issue but never complains of discomfort because it's more difficult for them to feel or sense pain. If an individual over-responds to interoceptive signals, they feel that their internal sensations more readily. They may be distracted or highly anxious with a constant highlighted awareness. Others report that they may feel so many different internal sensations all at once, and this is because they're so sensitive to everything coming within their bodies. It's important to acknowledge that both under and over responders may also have difficulty in discriminating or pinpointing exactly what internal sensation they're having and to make sense of it. Mailer suggests that an individual may complain of feeling sick but often can't give specific symptoms, or they may insist they feel happy even though they outwardly look angry. The Autism and Low Incidence coaching team from Ohio have written that good levels of interoceptive awareness are clearly linked to the development of many important skill areas, including self-regulation. Interoceptive awareness is the ability to notice sensations and give meaning to the sensations and feelings, while self-regulation is the ability to control the way you feel and act. The complexity of self-regulation of our emotional state is intertwined with interoception. For example, if you feel yourself getting tense and acknowledge that the emotion you are feeling is anger, you know to slow down and take a few deep breaths. This identification of anger and the subsequent self-regulation is often beyond the scope of an individual with interoceptive challenges. In addition, and important to know, is that the individual's ability to read their own physical signs and emotional states has been shown to directly impact the ability to read another person's physical and emotional state. With good interoceptive awareness, good self-regulation will not exist. Let's review different facets of interoception that we can use within a clinical pathway. The image is presented in a table format. The table consists of 2 columns and 7 rows. The first row is highlighted in orange and contains 2 column headings, action and activity. I will now go across each of the remaining 6 rows, describing first the action, then the activity of each component. During the assessment process, we should review attention, the ability to and skill of observing internal body sensations, detection, presence or absence of conscious reporting, magnitude, what is the intensity of the sensations, discrimination, the skill of localisation of the sense to a specific organ system and being able to differentiate it from other sensations, accuracy or sensitivity, complete, correct and precise monitoring, self-reporting, the ability to reflect upon the experiences of the interoceptive state, making judgments about the outcomes and describing them through verbal, sign or motor responses. During the assessment process, it's important to remember that a person may be hyposensitive in one sensory system and hypersensitive in another. For this reason, it can be helpful to also map the sensory profile and indicate where sensitivities are, including identifying what triggers are and what the sensory helpers are. Currently, there are no standardised tools to assess the entire interoceptive awareness of individuals, but there are several tools available for specific interoceptive aspects. We have the multi-dimensional assessment of interoceptive awareness, the Body Awareness Questionnaire, and the Toronto Alexithymia Scale. Mailer herself has created some specific tools such as the Interoceptive Awareness Interview, the Assessment of Self-Regulation, and the Caregiver Questionnaire for Interoceptive Awareness. Disappointingly, within the field of deafblindness, these tools have barriers to our community due to them relying on self-reporting, being geared towards an adult-only population, and being visually focused. Current research clearly shows that there are strategies that can be used to improve the ability of individuals to notice and begin to understand their body cues, that is, improve interoceptive awareness. It is possible to train the awareness of what's happening inside the body and to help the individual become aware of their internal sensations, and then help them to regulate the resulting emotions while they're still beginning before they get out of control. A therapist or teacher may direct the individual to their support network towards mindfulness activities to help them become more aware of the interoceptive sensations in the body. They may use body scanning visualizations, problem solving, adaptations within the routine. Heavy work. This is activity that pushes or pulls against the body to activate the proprioceptive pathways which support interoception. Or encourage a sensory diet, which is a set of physical activities used to attain and maintain appropriate arousal states throughout each day. For example, bouncing, rocking, swimming, swinging and swaying. Additionally, individuals can benefit from anatomy and social emotional books and by incorporating games to learn about their bodies. Dr. Neff from Neurodivergent Insight separates the under and over responder strategies and provides some great intervention ideas. The under responder experiences muted internal signals, meaning that sensory selves themselves are unsensitive, or the insurer is having difficulty receiving and incorporating the signals. They're simply not getting enough information to process what's going on. The strategies suggested include, firstly, increased body awareness using, for example, a body map, naming emotions or playing an emotional matching game. For example, match emotions by visually looking at pictures, feeling tactile images or tactile exploration of the face. Then progress on to talking about how they might feel physically and mentally with each emotion. Engage in exercises aimed to increase interoception using breathing techniques or alerting activities. Social stories are a great way to talk about the concepts that may be hard for an individual to understand or remember. For example, with sensations such as temperature regulation, use a social story about the clothes they wore in certain memorable situations. Create accommodations, for example, visual and tactile prompts and cues, and setting alarms to remind the individual to eat, drink, use a bathroom, and to take sensory breaks. The interoceptive over-responders have heightened experiences of their body signals. They struggle to differentiate the signals, and these signals may last longer than neurotypically expected. The strategies for this group include mindfulness practices that increase body awareness, and it can help with differentiation struggles. Additionally, strategies of breathing allow time to focus on what's happening within the individual. Growing hands-on kids describe yoga's focus on listening to your body and providing good vestibular and proprioceptive input as helpful for interoception. It encourages the individuals to slow down, pay attention to the present and how their body is feeling. Engaging the vestibular system by rocking and swinging and the proprioceptive system using the heavy activities of pushing and pulling, plus conscious acknowledgement. For example, with pain, if the individual has a heightened sense of pain that might last longer than expected following its onset, we need to acknowledge that pain is real, while also reminding the individual that pain doesn't necessarily equal danger. It's important to differentiate between pain that is causing harm and pain they experience as normal. Let's look at a couple of these strategies in more detail. Firstly, the body map. This image is a sketch outline of a body map with additional drawings representing feelings that are stuck on the body parts that they correlate to. For example, face on fire, tingly nose, knot in chest, tight fists, wobbly knees. The chart you choose for an individual can be a small representational image or an actual size chart traced around the person. It can be a 2D image, and by adding tactile markings, it can be made accessible, or if you have the resources, produce a 3D mould. To indicate the individual understands their chart and how it is connected to their body, activities in pointing to different body parts on the chart and then getting them to point to or move that part on the actual body can be very helpful. Playing a game of Simon Says using the chart. Use actions like clench your fist, breathe really hard, touch your heart, etc. Next, ask them to point to the body parts on the chart they used for each action. You could also point to a body part on the chart and ask them how it feels right now. For example, with the eyes, they could be itchy, sleepy, awake, dry, watery. Clinicians and educators can help the individual by identifying some of the external visible changes that we observe in an individual's body to cue them into possible body or emotional states. We can also provide opportunities to periodically check in or track how the individual feels using the body chart to reflect on the individual's current state throughout the day. Secondly, the body map concept can be used to help identify emotions. This is a picture of an outline body with main text in black stating, "Feelings are something we feel in our body." Additional shorter text surrounds the image. At 1 o'clock, the text says, "Show the places with these colours." Between 2 and 5 o'clock, we have colours and emotions in text together. Sad, blue; fear, black; guilt, brown; anger, red; jealous, green; nervous, orange; happy, yellow. At 7 o'clock, the text says, "Where do you feel your feelings?" This chart aims to connect the individual's emotions to their body to help them understand what's happening. Feelings can be placed on the map using words, colours, shapes, or textures. Breathing techniques are helpful strategies for calming as well as paying attention to what's going on inside our bodies. Here are a couple of examples from coping skills for kids. The first image represents the diamond technique. At the base of this pale blue background image, there's white text stating, "Using shapes to teach deep breathing." There is a large white square at the top of the image showing a black diamond shape. Along the border of the diamond are words, "Breathe in," "Breathe out," and "Hold." These shapes can be made more tactile for our deafblind community by adding textures and raised outlines for tactile tracing. Additionally, I've also used haptics on an individual's body to mimic the breathing technique during a yoga session. The next image is of a dark brown outlined figure of 8 lying sideways on a white background, titled Lazy 8 Breathing. It includes the words "breathe in" on the anti-clockwise movement around the figure of 8 and "breathe out" on the clockwise movement. A further example is called Simple Breaths, and it's from Growing Hands-On Kids. It uses imagery and converts well to sign language and object replacement. For example, using smell a flower for breathing in and blowing out a candle for breathing out. Behaviours that are considered challenging are commonly seen in charge syndrome. The reason for these behaviours can vary and may be due to multisensory impairments, inability to self-regulate, issues with arousal, and additionally, interoceptive awareness. I'd like to give you an example of how the interoceptive strategies are used with an adult individual living with charge. I would sincerely like to thank Ms. X for allowing us to share in her experience. I would also like to acknowledge my colleague and friend, Ms. Linny Oliver, who works as a communication guide, which is a comparable role to an intervener, as she supported Ms. X during all this process. It's important to discuss together with the individual what strategies could be used during periods of calmness. Collaborate on what has been tried previously as well as what has been effective, and be open on how the strategies could be used to help regain control when needed. Doing this together empowered the individual and gave them a sense of ownership and responsibility. This is important as the skills required to rebalance the emotional control and the choice of using these skills would ideally be made by the individual themselves in the long term rather than the support of the communication guide. First, we have the foundation stage. When the individual began to exhibit behaviours, the communication guide would approach them and using both hands sign, "Stop, look at me." Having eye contact was important to the individual. If the individual didn't respond, the communication guide would repeat this stage until they had eye contact. Step 1. Maintaining eye contact, the communication guide would then hold up 4 fingers on their left hand horizontally with a palm facing them. This was named the strategy position. When developing this method with the individual, the use of visual cues was important to them, so they had something to focus on using a mindfulness strategy. Pointing to the first finger, which we use as an Auslan list boy, the communication guide would then sign calm repeatedly. The individual would copy the sign or action. Step 2, pointing to the second finger, the communication guide would sign breathe, taking exaggerated deep breaths repeatedly. This is where patterns of breathing, for example, the diamond or figure of 8 activities could be used. These activities need to be practiced in a period of calm so that they can be employed during this period of enlightenment. Step 3. Pointing to the third finger, the communication guide would sign walk to indicate to the individual to go for a walk and lean against a wall. This was to introduce the proprioceptive bombardment suggested in the strategies for an over-responsive presentation. If the individual was still unable to manage their heightened state, the communication guide and the individual would stop walking and re-engage the strategy of eye contact. The communication guide would then hold up their hand in the strategy position and wait for the individual to copy. The communication guide would then point back to the first finger and then the second to remind them to focus on calm and breathing. With prompting, and when their state was not at maximal height, the individual would be encouraged to initiate going back to these steps themselves. We have the reinforcement stage. When the individual had begun self-regulation but may not have gained composure using the above strategies, the communication guide would face them, engage eye contact, and hold up their hand in the strategy position again and point to the fourth finger and sign what. The individual was then given an opportunity to express what they are feeling. The communication guide would remind them, talk, friend, family. At this stage, the individual would often feel upset about their behaviour, so it was really important for them to be heard without judgment and to have their feelings validated. By being consistent with this method, there were many occasions when it was only necessary to engage eye contact for the communication guide to hold their hand up in the strategy position and for the individual to start self-regulating. When having casual conversations with other deafblind community members, the individual would instigate showing them this method using a visual social story, going through each step and talking about what situations they use them in and how it helped them self-regulate. These were always empowering conversations for the individual and their self-awareness. As the field of interoceptive research continues to evolve, researchers, scientists, clinicians and educators are exploring its potential application in the development of interventions for disorders relating to interoceptive dysfunction, mental health and well-being. By understanding and harnessing interoception, we may be able to add to or improve the way we act with participants in our deafblind interventions. On this slide is an orange thought bubble with a white outline. Thank you. Are there any questions? Right. It looks like we really don't have time.
But I'm sure Melissa will hang around for a little bit if you do
I-
have a question.
yeah. I will, and I have put my contact details up on the screen in case there are some questions that anyone would like to send directly to me.
Well, Melissa, judging by the crowd in this room this afternoon, this is a topic that is of interest to many. And one of the things I can say is I'm really happy to hear that the research and the work is continuing in this area because I think it is so important.
Very much so.
And thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Gift
Thank
for
you.
you
Thank
and,
you for that.